Howdy, folks. In today's episode, we'll talk about how to stay creative with the creator of some of the most compelling photography out there, right after this. Welcome to Camera Shake, where we bring you the insider scoop on all things photography and videography, giving you a unique opportunity to stay ahead of the curve. As always, I'm your host, Kirsten Nuts, and before we get into it, I've got one thing to ask of you. I've noticed that over 65% of our viewers on YouTube and listeners in audio are not actually subscribed to this channel. I mean, come on, people. You can really help me out by hitting that subscribe button. It'll help me get even more amazing guests on the show, which I like to say, don't even think it's possible anymore. It's just one click, though. That's all it takes. Thank you so much. Now, without further ado, though, let's give it up for today's special guest, the landscape and travel photographer, artist, Fujifilm ambassador, and as I just recently found out, figure skater, actor, and voiceover artist. Please welcome the creative force that is Karen Hutton. Karen, thank you so much.
How you doing, Kirsten? Good to see you.
I'm very well. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show. I described you as a creative force because, you know, I knew of your, or I have known of your work for quite some time, but every time I check out your website, there's like another dimension to it. How would you, in a nutshell, I know this is going to be difficult, in a nutshell, how would you describe yourself as a creator?
Wow, you didn't tell me you were going to ask that question. I guess I would say that my work is divinely inspired. I had a vision of light when I was a child that was so powerful it has defined my entire life. And now, these many decades later, that's still what defines my life and what inspires my work.
That's really interesting. You mentioned that to me before. So you had a vision. How would you describe that? Like how did that sort of manifest itself?
So you want to hear the vision? Because
Sure.
It was. So there are, you have dreams, and then you have an imagination, and then you have whatever. And people like to put what I'm about to tell you into, oh, you have such an imagination. I'm like, actually, no, this was a visitation from God, because I knew God and talked to him all the time when I was a kid, thought it was normal. Nowadays you can't even talk about that. So the vision was real. It was like, there's me here, and then there's I was every bit as real in this vision. And I came back from it going, that is the coolest thing. That's how I'm going to live my life. That's literally how it worked. So basically, the short story of it is the vision was me standing on a stage, and as happens in the other dimensional realities, you're also you kind of standing behind yourself, watching yourself. Anyway, I was on this stage, and it was like an old Vic, beautiful old Vic style theater, and full, audience was full, and I was standing on the stage. My mouth was open. It was silent, so I didn't know if I was singing or speaking or what I was doing, but my arms were outreached, out. And there I was doing whatever I was doing on the stage, performing, I assumed. And this huge column of light came down from above and washed through my whole body and out my mouth, out my hands, out my gut, just washed out on these people and healed some who needed healing, but transformed them all. And it wasn't like me, because I was only like 8 years old at the time. I didn't, like how adults get, I'm going to fix you, right? Here, I know what you should do. It had nothing to do with that. It was this event. And I always talked to God when I was a child. So I knew that it was, him showing me this. And, and so I watched the people in the vision, I watched the people leave the theater, and they were just light, and they were like beaming, and they were happy. Some were crying, some were laughing. They were all just, in that state of awe and wonder and joy. And it was the most amazing experience that even to this day that I've ever had in or out of this body. And because I used to have these out-of-body experiences all the time and have had them, throughout my life. anyway, so when I came as a child, I was like, wow, that was so cool, right? And like, wow, that's awesome. That's what I'm going to do with my life.
And so how did that manifest itself? So initially, did you, because I know, you used to be an actor, and of course, I mentioned you're still a voiceover artist, even to this day. Did that manifest itself with like sort of, a love for the stage? Did you get into stage acting first?
So yes, because, at some point, when you're 8, it's just all vision and everything's possible, you think. But then, you get a little older and you realize, okay, so I guess I have to earn my way in this life. And you start thinking about, as everyone does, or at least in my day and at that age, what do I want to do? And there were kids, I want to be a fireman. I want to be a teacher. I want to be a blah, and I was like, what do I want? And all I could think of was that vision. And I'm like, what job description fits that? So I just sort of started, even at this crazy early age, breaking down, okay, I was on a stage. I was using my voice. There was the overall theme of light and healing and transformation and bringing this amazingness to people. So I just started down the list and tried to match that up with the things that I love to do. And so my mother was a horsewoman, so we had horses. So, I was an equestrian and I taught riding for 45 years. And, but, I was in equestrian sports and a competitive rider in several equestrian disciplines because that was being out in front of people and involved horses, which my mother brought to the party. Then, I became a figure skater. Charles Schultz, Snoopy. Charles Schultz had a beautiful ice arena not far from me. And there was this whole element of gliding and floating and moving and just this feeling that just resonated with me as a result of this image. And I'm very kinetic. So that was appealing. So I figure skated for a number of years and for all those reasons. And then the part about that I loved was performing and acting and making up stories, which was also part of that vision. So I got into acting and, I was good at it and made it my profession for many years. And of course, voiceover was born out of that. And a voice is actually designed to convey and broadcast you. Like emotionally, spiritually, on a soul level, your health, your intent, everything. If your voice is like open and resonating in your body, that's the type of instrument that it is, and that's what it's designed to do. So, using my voice, and I saw how it impacted, I saw how the sound, the resonance would impact people. So I was like, okay, well, that's part of it too. So I just kind of worked my way down the list of possibilities that vision could most easily come through, because there seemed to be no job description for standing pillar of light. Crazy, but I couldn't find that. And then I always loved photography. My mother and her family, she was born in 1920, but her whole family was into documenting their lives photographically. Like, you don't think about photography back in the day, but she had portraits of her from the time let's see, she was born in 1920. So she was probably maybe 4 or 5 years old when they started to, take her into studios and have these photos. So I have these photographs of her all the way back. So photography, and that her whole side of the family documented everything, and they were remarkable. And so I was like, oh, photography. Well, then, I start realizing, wait a minute, what's the medium of photography? It's light. Now I'm channeling light. And it became a way to convey. I knew that part of my purpose and job here was to help elevate, bring light, transform, bring this certain thing to the world in whatever way, God intended me to do that. I knew that was my job. So I was just trying to find what's the best way to pull that off. So that's a long description, but that truly is the life path that brought me to this point.
I find the similarities very, very interesting, actually, because I always think that, as an artist, and that's actually regardless as to whether you're a musician or, a painter or a photographer for that matter, But it's really, we always describe our output as our voice. It's the way we want to say something, and then the message that we want to convey, we channel that through our art. And I've always thought that, I've never made, to me, there's never been sort of a barrier between different art forms. I mean, I'm saying that, and this, all of our listeners and viewers on YouTube probably know by now, I used to be a session musician. So my career for 25 years was in music. And I remember when, I made that full-time change into photography, there were a lot of people, who just knew me as, Katie guitarist. And so, of course, a lot of people were initially wondering, well, how the hell did that happen? Like, how did you go, from full-time music to full-time photography? And to me, I've always thought that's a weird question, because to me it makes perfect sense. There's no difference between these two things, because it's just a matter of expression and expressing yourself, which is in photography, it's a visual medium, and in music, it's an auditory experience. But ultimately, it's still the same thing.
It is. And if you're an artist and a creative, you know that. But what I realized was, so, when I was doing voiceover, I had voice coaching to help open up my voice, because it needed that to be fully successful as an actor and a voiceover person. And so what that did was the person that coached me taught me how to open up my voice, but she also made a point of teaching me how to teach it. So I went the full distance and became qualified in that particular way of voice coaching. And so, you live in the world, so you got to make money. So where's the money? Who wants to work that hard on their voice? Who has the output that requires that? So I ended up the best. I worked with business people and I worked with actors, but the best group, I keep wanting to say audience, but the group that needed it the most, that had the least connection to all this, were TV and radio news broadcasters. So I was a voice coach for 25 years, really focusing mostly on them who were not raised that way. And it was a real eye-opener to them, because what they were taught in news, and I think this addresses or applies to just normal people, is they came into their profession being taught, this is how you write a story, this is how you stand in front of a camera. They don't really tell you how to dress, but you figure it out. And, there's the rules of journalism and blah, blah, blah. And your news director is God. So that's what they come in with. And then they go, well, I don't know how to talk. So then they look at each other and start mimicking each other. And it becomes what I call reporterese. Where you've got this syncopated rhythm that they all have, but it's not real. It's not conversational. It doesn't sound like you're a real human being. So the people who wanted to elevate their careers, which they all did, and they were all in a hurry to do it, to the upper levels, had to get good at being a real person in front of the camera, which to you and me may sound weird, but what I learned over the years is, as soon as you put a camera in front of somebody, this thing changes. And just to survive the experience, you put on, layers so that you don't feel so. And the layers in the reporting world were this kind of fakey sounding. So I had to not only open their voice, to get the resonance and to get the restriction gone and to get it, sounding good, but then take that and bring it back into language, which, in English, it just automatically wants to crush the sound. But also then the energy and the delivery and just all the things, each layer of which can strip away all the good sound. So in the end, they could, as I had to do in voiceover, take a script or take a situation or a story or a set of requirements, or whether they're client or whether they're news, and make it your own. So you and I got to express, like, you might have to, maybe you wrote your own music, maybe you played music other people wrote, but it's open to interpretation. In the worlds I was teaching, that's not open to interpretation, but there is a way to bring yourself to it. And that's what I ended up teaching people. And that was my education for, wow, people really do. And then I would watch how their careers would flourish and how, their lives would get better. I mean, across the board in such miraculous ways, their lives would change. And I was like, there it is. Isn't that amazing? And then I realized that's just a small subsect of humanity, and that these lessons about voice, even though you and I go, well, duh, the rest of the world isn't saying that. They're struggling, and they don't know how to open all this up and let all this, wonderful, unique expression come through them. And that's what it is. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It absolutely makes sense. What I find super interesting is really how, the process that people go through in order to find their own voice. When I look at your photography, it's really interesting because, again, in your portfolio, you have wildlife photography, you have landscape photography, for example, travel photography, but it really doesn't matter what genre I look at. It all has your unique signature, stamped all over it, your unique voice. So I'd be intrigued to know, how did you find your own voice in photography? Was that a process of experimentation, or did that come to you straight away? Is that how did that develop?
Well, okay, so I'm kind of telling this backwards, but yes, I did some experimenting, but that was more experimenting with techniques and processes that would get me to what it was I wanted to see, which was, all right, so I'm trying to think if there's an exception. To just give me a second, because I don't think there is. No, I don't think there is. Okay, so the thing that I knew about photography was, I was always like, well, why do you want to do that? I'm always like wanting to know why. I ask more questions than a 5-year-old. I have a friend tell me that years ago, and it's actually true. So there's no point in photographing something that I don't freaking love. And what I always want to do is bring the feeling of it. So going back to the vision, right? The vision of, God speaking through me, and the light is everywhere. What I learned because I grew up on a ranch in the country, and, what I discovered with my horses and my dogs, and then being out in nature and stuff, is that voice is everywhere. And, it's woven into nature, even down to the patterns and the I want to say frequencies, but the patterns are representative of frequencies that are woven into nature by the Creator. So, and I didn't have to learn that in a book somewhere. I lived it. So, people could say, oh, that's religious, or that's this. And I'm like, whatever, call it whatever you need to, get up in the morning. But this is what it is. And so I knew that I'm like, why even be out here? And I'm like, it's because of that. Sometimes I would actually hear it. And mostly I would see it and feel it. And it would affect me, and then I'd become one with it, and I would get so much communication when I was out there. And I'm like that, and I always had this vision guiding the way. My job, what's my job? How do I do it? So there's no point in photographing to a standard made by man, made by another person. I learned that in acting. You can't. You got to show up and be you, because you're the only you. And, if you try to imitate somebody else, first of all, you're not as good as them at that, because they're them. And then you've just cut yourself off at the knees, because now you're not even bringing yourself. So it's like double indemnity. So I learned where I loved to be. And then I would sit there and I'd go, but what is it about this exactly? Like and I used to play the game, I love this. Why? Oh, I love that. And so I learned to sort of hone in on. It's sort of like a I don't know if it's a flashcard is the right. It's like an icon, I guess, on a computer. You have a little icon for, Photoshop, right? And you click the icon, and Photoshop opens up. So I had this vision. It wasn't about Photoshop, but it was this idea that if I photograph in such a way that it's the icon so that if somebody looks at it and like presses on it, which is the equivalent of engaging with it, which is kind of my job to bring it in such a way that they want to, or people that should look at it will look at it. And then once they engage, the whole thing opens up and it feeds them in some way. And so that became part of my technique, I guess, for choosing the subject. And then I had to learn how to process images and edit images in such a way that all that would carry all the way through, because you can kill that in your post-processing. So then you got to go through the same kinds of questions and examination, and you might be drawing even from different artistic styles, different artistic mediums. Even like I love wood. What do you call those? Woodcut art. The Japanese woodcut art, and I love certain kinds of sculptures and certain, the way, and light. Of course, I'm always informed by light. So I had to learn how to do all that, and that doesn't even include the other worlds that I would see when I was out photographing, because I had to just choose to look at the world that I was in photographing, and then now I'm like, yeah, but now I want to make images of the other worlds I saw out there. Anyway, that's another part of the story. But yeah, so that's kind of how I got there, and how I figured out how to create the look, and why would I apply that process, which is a process, to only one aspect of what I love to see, want to see, and need to see.
Hey, let me just jump in real quick to tell you about the amazing sponsor of this episode, Platypod. Platypod offers innovative camera support systems designed to unleash your creativity. With their stable, versatile, and portable solutions, you can capture stunning shots like never before. And I'm not just saying that. As the host of the Camera Shake podcast, I can personally vouch for Platypod's incredible products. They've become an integral part of the show. In fact, I'm surrounded by various Platypod products holding up lights, cameras, microphones, and so on. It's really helped to transform the way I make the show and the way I shoot at home, in the studio, and on location. But don't just take my word for it. Explore Platypod's website at www.platypod.com to discover their range of products, including the Platypod Extreme, Platyball tripod heads, and the brand new handle, of course. Make sure to follow Platypod on Instagram and Facebook at Platypod Tripods for exclusive updates, tips, and giveaways. By choosing Platypod, you're not only investing in your photography, but you're also supporting the Camera Shake Photography Podcast. Thanks again to Platypod, our amazing sponsor. Platypod, where innovation never sleeps. It seems to me that, sometimes you meet people who have this unique ability to get really good at whatever it is that they put their mind to. And there is a word for it, and I just can't remember what it's called. But there's, there are people who basically they start doing one thing, and all of a sudden they get like super awesome at it, and then they move on to another thing, and then they get like super awesome at that, and you got to go, how does that even? Do you, like, when you get involved into something new, no matter whether it's figure skating or equestrian sports or acting or photography, is it a case of you going all in, like you put the shutters up and basically just focus all of yourself into that on that one thing? I'm a huge
student of immersion. Yeah,
immersion.
Because you can't even get good enough at something to know if you like it unless you do that. And the only way to learn it is to immerse yourself.
I really suspected that that was the case because I use the immersion technique myself, and I use it knowingly when it comes to language learning, because I've found that if you completely and utterly immerse yourself into a language, it's really the best, the easiest, and in fact the quickest way, and the most comprehensive way of learning a language. So in linguistic terms, basically, it's, you do a thing like Duolingo, you learn vocabulary, you read books about grammar, you listen to, podcasts in that language, you watch TV programs in that, or movies in that language. You really immerse yourself in the whole thing, in the language, the culture, and everything else. And if you do that for long enough and intensely enough, you'd be surprised how quickly you can pick up that language. And in an ideal sense, even if you know somebody else who's a native speaker of that language, you can even start communicating with them or conversing with them, which will even, allows you to work on your accent and all the rest of it. And so I know how powerful that technique is.
Yeah. And I mean, truly, it goes back to, I guess it's neurology, but neurologically speaking, what you're doing when you're learning something new is building new synapses in your brain and your whole nervous system, if it's kinetic at all. And it takes a certain kind of focus to do that. If everything in our society is all about, short term, this short term pulls us off, so deep focus. There's actually a book called Deep Focus, which is great. And it kind of goes into this more, but Cal Newport is the author of that book. But basically, I'm not quoting him, but I'm just saying what I've learned is that it takes time and repetition. And I know this from being an athlete, exactly what kind of focus and repetition and synapse building and muscle building it takes to develop high-end skills. And the high-end skills is where the freedom and the delight is.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
Learning isn't that much fun, but the mastery is.
Yes, the mastery is. And, again, as all of our listeners know by now, is I always relate things back to music because I know a lot about it. It's very, very, very similar. Well, in fact, it's exactly the same thing when you're learning a musical instrument. So when you're learning the guitar, in my case, or whatever instrument it is about repetition, repetition, repetition.
Yep.
And the beauty of it is that once you get to that point of mastery, some people say it's 10,000 hours. I'm not really sure whether that's actually true, but, you can just think of it like that. You get to the point where really, the instrument really plays itself. And I know that when I pick up the guitar, I don't have to think about it. It's a little bit
and that's so much fun, right?
Yeah, it's so much fun. And I'll tell you what's interesting about this is. So I used to be
it takes a boatload of work to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. But it takes a boatload of work to get good at just about anything, and that's...
Yeah.
But that's the thing. But I remember, when I used to work as a session musician, so the thing about the difference between, let's say, a songwriter or somebody who likes to do stuff at home, pick up a guitar and write a song, and a session musician is that if you're a songwriter, you could, in theory, wait until creativity kisses you on the forehead and you go, oh, I have this beautiful idea, and you sit down and you write a song. As a session musician, basically, you're told to show up at the studio at 4 p.m. and then it's like, okay, well now we're going to record this. Be creative right now. It's 12 minutes past 4. Go. And that's a very different thing, and it's mentally a different challenge. And I remember, most of my friends used to ask me, how do you do that? Like, how can you just come up with stuff just like that? And the way I always used to describe it is in my mind's eye, in my head, I think of it as a door, and it's that door that locks away your creative mind, right? All of your creativity. But I've learned how to use the key to open that door and then just let it flow. And I can do that at 12 past 4, and I can do it at 5:30, or I can do it at 10 minutes past 6 in the morning. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Because I put myself mentally into that space. It's really, just professionally, it's never happened to me that I just said, I can't think of anything.
Yeah. It's funny you talk about being a session musician and a commercial photographer and these things that come with constrictions. I think the best creativity comes from the limitations.
Absolutely.
If you're trying to be creative and everything is available and it's all ideas are good, you got nothing. You just sit there and pick your nose pretty much. But if you have constrictions, so if you're a commercial photographer, in my case, a commercial voiceover artist, and you have to bring this certain thing to every session, just like you have to bring a thing in a music session. It forces you to get faster, which is good because we need that shape. You still have to bring it and bring who you are, but it really forces you to do it. And so a lot of times when I'm like, for instance, so I led photography retreats, mostly in Europe, some in the US before the pandemic. And, there were naturally constrictions built in because we were only there for so many days. And so on and so forth. One of the favorite things that I taught to them, as well as now when I'm teaching Kelby 1 classes about how to be creative, is if you're not a commercial fill in the blank photographer, artist, whatever, and you don't have any particular constrictions, make them up. Give yourself, depending on where you are as a photographer. If you're beginner, intermediate, advanced, you got to kind of figure out what you can and want to do. So I also teach, some of the thinking and, assessing going into this. But let's say, you're pretty good at XYZ. Well, then get better at shooting more, X number of photos and then do it in 30 seconds. Give yourself an hour to go find 20 images that matter using light and shadow. First of all, you have to make the time in your day. You have to press, in your mind anyway, press the go button and then stop. You don't get to just keep going and going. You create these limitations because that's where you dig deeper rather than just kind of spread out and get really general. So, that's something I always try to tell my folks who are trying to be creative. And also, photography is so technical that you can really get lost in the techniques and the gear and this and that. But that's all they're supposed to be there to serve you and serve your vision. So a lot of people don't know how to access their vision or feel not confident about their vision, or this whole creative thing seems just a little woo. So it's easier to focus on a camera and to focus on how to move sliders and, things like that. But I'm always encouraging people to use these tools in service of the bigger vision.
Exactly. And I always, I've always felt that when it comes to creativity, it's about having that laser focus, on something. Like, for example, and again, we can compare music and photography. So as a photographer, I often say like, okay, well, and this is, again, something that I've done myself in the past. There was a time when I really like street photography. I really like looking at street photography. I find it fascinating. And so I, at some point, decided that I wanted to get better at photography, but at street photography. But the problem is, of course, in the beginning, I think I made the same mistake that most photographers, make, and you kind of go like, okay, I gotta get ready to go into town and shoot some street photography, right? But what lens do I take? Well, I'll take them all, right? Because there could be an opportunity for the 50 mil, the 24-70. The 70-200, because, you might need it, and
right.
And so on and so forth. Yeah. And so, he end up like a, what do they call it? A packing mule. You drag all your stuff into town. It's a complete pain in the backside. And you end up creating hardly any photos because you're just so bogged down with the gear. And whenever you see something that you think might be interesting, your first thought goes to the gear, and then you're confronted with choices. Now, am I going to use the 24-70 for this, or would it be the 50, or would it be the 85, or maybe maybe I compress it a little bit more. Maybe the 70-200 might be better. What should I do? Blah blah blah. By the time you make a decision, that scene's gone. The clouds are gone. The pedestrians gone. The car's gone. Everything's gone, and you've basically lost the plot at that point. And so what I used to do was I used to basically say to myself, right, okay, I'm going to go to town. I'm going to take one camera, one lens. That is it, right? At the beginning, I used to take like a 50 mil standard, or like even, 24-70 or whatever. But then I sort of thought, like, what if I took something that's really unusual, like a 14? Okay, so not necessarily, I don't really see that much street photography shot with a 14, but I bet if I put my mind to it, I can come up with some really cool angles just using that super wide lens. And what that did was two things. One, there was no confusion. It was like, all right, we're not doing 70-200. We're not doing compression today. We're not doing, smooth, silky backgrounds today. That's not what we're doing. What we're doing is super wide shots with a 14, and we're better find some interesting stuff to shoot. And so we're going to think about that. So we're starting to think about the subject matter rather than the gear.
Right.
And in music, it's exactly the same thing. Like, if I went to record a session and this was an R&B artist, right? I wasn't going to play heavy metal on that session. So forget anything I know about heavy metal, forget that. I wasn't really going to play trad jazz. Can forget all of that, right? Don't need that. You know, and if the producer says, man, I want you to put down like a really funky guitar, right? And now we're laser focused. Okay, I asked 2 or 3 questions. Do you want single notes? Do you want some chords? Do you want it to, you know, do you want it to sound like Le Freak, or do you want me to go more jazzy on that? And that would give me like some very simple one-liner instructions, and then we're off. You know, and it's what it does is it creates that laser focus that you can then, it basically, what's the word? It creates a situation where you don't actually have to make as many decisions as you think you have to make from the outset. And that's why I always think creativity is easier than most people think, but people are overwhelmed with choices.
Right. Yeah, the overwhelmed state is not super creative. You know, you just made me think of something, and I think all of these analogies are great. I think people can learn a lot from them to, you know, zhuzh up and alter up their approach, because what you were just saying reminded me of, take Fujifilm. Now, that is my version of a commercial gig, because things are changing now, but, you know, in the past 6 years, 7 years that I've been a Fujifilm ambassador, the kinds of projects were, okay, we're going to launch this lens, or we're going to launch this camera, or we're going to launch this camera lens combination. And so they always loved my landscape work. So they would, you know, hand whatever to me, and it would, you know, relate to landscape. So I would take, like, even if it's a macro lens. In fact, there are 2 projects that I did that way. One was their launch of, at the time, the XT5 and the 30 millimeter macro. And so, you know, what do people expect to see? So you do those, you know, you do, standard macro, and, you know, there's a little variety in there. And then I was on a road trip, so I was going different places. So I was applying that to different places. But then I will sit there and go, okay, got those. Now, what else can this lens do? And so I shot big, epic landscapes, panos, do the up close, and do like 3 views of the same scene that you wouldn't necessarily know came from this standing in the same spot, and be able to walk away with this huge variety from this little lens, which was artistically fulfilling for me and the way I see the world, but also really made that lens look pretty bomber, because, you know, people who go, well, I like to shoot landscape, I don't need a macro lens. And I'm like, here, look at these landscapes, you know? And there was a project they did they chose a handful of us to go into, were they national parks? I think they were on that. Yeah, it was the Great American Road Trip Adventure or something or other. Anyway, so we got to choose the location and the national park. We all had to end up somewhere different. But I was assigned the GFX 100 and the 120 macro. And, you know, and then I decided, so I'm like, oh, how fun, a restriction. And I've got to go to a national park and shoot with that gear and nothing else. And then I went, but that's not hard enough. Let me go to a national park I've never been to. So I went to Zion, because at that point, that was my first trip to Zion National Park. And I did. And then I wanted to, you know, I kept upping the ante, because I'm like, well, that's interesting, but what else can I do? So I made it the epic adventure lens in Zion. And I did all of those things, you know, standard macro and they all told stories, and they all were within the way I see, which you noted earlier is consistent across all types. So there was macro, there was landscape, there were, you know, storytelling, there's pano, there's, you know, abstract, there's all these different genres, all with the same lens, all in a national park I'd never been to, all of which told the story of Zion. And that was my goal. And then we filmed it, you know, made a film about it. And it was really, I thought, man, this is like the ideal artist assignment. And it was so eye-opening. And in fact, that year, for some reason, like there was Kelby one, there was Fujifilm, and there was something else that I was given here we have a project for you. And that year I shot with almost nothing but a macro lens. So this was the last of like 5 projects. And I was really pushed because at that point I was like, well, I've done macro now, because there had been 4 projects before that of varying types. One of them is a Kelby 1 class that I have, which is macro photography, and it's on their full-on roster. And I was like, yeah, okay. I got to talk about my idea behind macro. And now this was late in the year, the last one, and I'm like, a macro lens again? What do I do now? Like the restriction, I thought I'd shot my wad. I'm like, what else can I do with a macro? I mean, I had to really think about it. What am I going to do? And it was such an eye opener for me, because the other thing I was like was that I said, I keep saying like, I hate it when people do that, and here I'm doing it. Is I was like, well, Zion. There, I just did it again. I was in Zion thinking, okay, what other perspectives can we get on Zion? And in Zion, it's hard to get the big, epic, up high view because it's just not built that way. So I got in a helicopter with my macro lens and GFX and photographed these. They were insane, because from a helicopter at that focal distance, what you see is not what you would normally think of. So you get to see a whole new point of view. You're restricted, but in being restricted, you just like opening up a new can of whoop ass. And you're like, wow, I didn't even know this existed. So I guess we're both speaking to going deeper, whether you're put yourself in a situation where you're forced to do that, or whether you put restrictions on yourself purposely, whether that be time of day, subject, lens, distance and width, and all this kind of thing. I did New York one day with a 27 millimeter on 1.4. That was my restriction, because New York freaked me out, and I'd go on sensory overload, and I never got a good photograph of New York, because I was like, this is too much. I can't take it. So I threw on the 27 millimeter, put it on 1.4, and only used that, and only photographed what I wanted to see, loved to see, and needed to see at that focal length and at that aperture. And it was such a revelation.
You just give me a great idea. I think the next time I go into town to do some street photography, I'm going to do it with a macro lens. That might be a great idea.
I love choosing unlikely lenses. What is the unlikely choice? Everybody expects this, and I expect this, and I've always done this. Yeah. What would be the unlikely choice? And it's fascinating.
And also, it just allows you to see, a world that you think
yeah,
from a different perspective, and sort of in a new light. That's why I love about macro photography. I've only really fairly recently really got into macro photography, mainly because I get assignments from Platypod. And basically, it's like, hey, can you make a video about this technique? I'm like, sure, I can. How?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I'm going to figure it out, right? But in doing so, it really allows you to not only push your own ability, and you're stretching yourself technically, but also your creative mind. And this is something I've sort of described several times on this podcast. And in general, that's kind of how I think. I always think of photography, or photographers, I should say. Well, let's put it this way. I think of photography as a discipline or an art form that is both technical and creative. And I sort of think of it as a line, a spectrum, if you will. And so let's say on the one extreme end is the purely technical, on the other extreme end is the purely creative. And each person, each photographer sits on this line, on this spectrum somewhere, right? Some people might be more technical, some people might be more creative. Some people might be at the extreme ends. Like I know creative people who have absolutely zero idea when it comes to the technology. It's just a tool to them, and they're really good at doing whatever it is that they're doing. But I also know people who are like super technical and really have a problem with the creativity side.
Right.
I find that very often in camera clubs, for example. Where often it's almost like, and I feel like it's maybe for some people it's like a safety net, maybe, we feel like we know technology, because we use computers and cell phones and all that, and so for camera is a technological thing, and there's a handbook, and there's like YouTube videos or whatever, and an instruction manual. I can learn how to use this machine. But then the difficult part is like, what do I point it at? Like, what is it that I'm actually shooting? And so
Right.
so I feel like different people sit on this line, and maybe the ideal point is somewhere right in the middle, where you're just as technologically versed as you are creatively capable, maybe, But I think
Right.
it's probably for most people, it's sort of almost like a personal thing.
Yeah.
But I also feel like there's always scope to develop and to grow and to learn new things and to challenge yourself with, with restrictions like you mentioned, for example.
Right. And that can, it just, whatever it is that it takes to have that aha in your mind, or that moment of awe. So, okay. So something you said just brought me into something I want to make a point of here. There's two things. One, so I've taught everything I've ever done. So I've had to learn to be creative about how to convey certain kind of out there ideas in a really practical, easy to understand and apply manner. And so because in photography, everybody, there's no end of people who will tell you how to use your camera, what sliders to move, all that stuff, is covered. But the thing that I have to bring is this thing where you said, you always know your work. And I'm like, people always want to know how to do that. Well, that's a lot less. Some people kind of like who can't explain it. Their way of, since they can't explain it, they just say, well, you either have it or you don't. And I'm like, well, that's so cheap. Don't crap out like that. That's not fair. So I go, well, how would you say what it is you do? And that was, so many people wanted to know how I did what I did, that I was like, how do I do what I do? And then I was like, okay, I figured it out. And then I'm looking at it and experiencing and going, how do I explain that? So it was very difficult. And when I first started, trying, I was in front of audiences, hired to speak about these things. And, in the beginning, before this all started getting out, I watched people in the back of the room, shake their head and walk out of the room. And I was like, oh God, this is either career suicide or the best thing I've ever done. I don't know which right now. Anyway, so one of the things that has come to light, thank God, because I've always known it. I was born knowing it. Then I had my childhood experience, and I'm like, okay, but nobody else apparently has had that. So how do I bring that? And there's a man named Dacher Keltner who started. He worked with a number of other, PhD level, whatever you call those super qualified, super smart people, and he made a study of awe. AWE. So this is number one of the two things I want to share with you about all of this, because I found myself having to explain these concepts to people, largely men, because photography is largely dominated by men. It's just a fact. And they have a certain way of thinking, and a lot of them are of a certain age. And, it's a little bit like, baked ceramic, and you've got to find a very gentle way to kind of get in there because what they were asking me was how to do that thing, but they were having a really hard time hearing how I said to do it. So I was like, all right, I need something more scientific, something more irrefutable, because, even one of my best friends in the industry who's been in it for, decades and is very well known and very well respected, loves my photography, but he'd say, oh, Karen, she's so great. Your photography is amazing. She's a little woo-woo, but she's great. And I'm like, okay, that's a little bit like I love you smack. But at the same time, I understood, the spirit of it. And I went, we need to normalize this. We need to find a way to make this be how we approach it, because people will be happier. They'll love their results more. They'll feel better. All those things. So Dacher Keltner comes along some years ago, and started a whole study, with other, I keep wanting to call them scientists, but whatever, studying the studying awe. So I'm going to short story it and go, they determined the neurological results of it. The repercussions are so huge. Not only how you felt, your brain, your breathing, your lungs, your neurological system, your societal interactions, your compassion, just across the board. And at this point, they're calling awe like the 11th emotion, right? It wasn't on the emotional scale, but it's starting to become that way, largely because of his work, because he could empirically show it. They did studies there, it's official. They did the tests. They had the probes. They had all the, I don't do that stuff. But they did it. So I could start pointing to him for, all right, for the longest time, I said, it's about awe. What do you photograph that makes you feel that way? Because you need to feel it if you're going to convey it. And then I found a million different ways to put that across. And thank God I had Dr. Keltner to go here, because I knew it up close and personal. But how do I explain it to people who aren't quite signed on? The second thing that happened that enabled me to explain why you have to be in this almost rarefied state to really bring it across, because we do work with light, is were the particle beam experiments. I lived in the Bay Area for, many, many years. Grew up in California, but lived in the Bay Area for 20, 25 years, and would drive by the Stanford accelerator, not mechanism, but, that facility a lot. And I always wondered, what went on there. So I was always kind of curious. I'm not a quantum physicist, but I was always curious, what are they doing? So when I started to learn, just on the most basic level, what they determined early on in these particle beam experiments was the ways in which, so they would do these experiments, and it had to do with, shooting the beam, the particles of light, whatever they were shooting, to a target, and it would go through a slot and so on and so forth. And all their readings, they'd do a certain thing. So when they were just doing it by themselves, they could get certain results. The minute they started bringing other people in, the results changed, but it was the same experiment. So why was that? Again, short storying it, what they determined was that the onlookers, the people present, the experiments were altered based upon emotion, expectation, thoughts, and feelings, totally changed the results of these particle beam experiments. So I was like, well, there it is. There I've got my empirical evidence for why, because essentially cameras are like little particle beam accelerators. Our medium is light. Our SD or, cards, whether they're SD or whatever kind of card you have, is the target. And you are the beam of light. And so your thoughts and feelings and expectations and what you love and all this, that's why I talk about that stuff so much, because you got to kind of, fan the flame on, get that going on, so that when you pick up your particle beam accelerator and you flow that stuff in, yes, with the right technique, because, if these quantum physicists hadn't set up the equipment correctly, they couldn't have done it anyway. So, but that needs to be a given. So learn your camera enough to do that, so that this thing can happen and go through and go bam, land on your card with the thoughts and feelings and all that intact. And then it really does become an expression, not just an accomplishment.
And you've just very beautifully and eloquently explained why it is that when you give 10 photographers the same subject to shoot, you'll get 10 different results. And that's exactly why.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to get that. Where it really gets interesting is if you give 10 different photographers who are well-versed in what I just said, the same lens and the same gear and the same assignment, and who go out and apply this, that's when it gets really interesting. And that's what I found in my photo retreats, because when you have an intensive time where you're teaching these concepts and then bringing people out into beautiful places with varying assignments and then turn them loose, but say the one constant, our scenery's changing, the assignments change, but the one constant is this thing now that I've taught you about how to ground and focus and, get into you so that you can bring that, beam of light through your quantum accelerator and create something unique. And that was where I got to see how incredible this whole thing is. And so they started creating work that was on a par with mine, but in their own unique way.
So tell me a little bit about your photo retreats. Where do they happen?
Well, I'm not doing them now. Travel just became problematic for about I don't need to list the reasons. So given that I'm not doing them now, I'm applying the information. I think the information is important. So I'm working with Kelby One right now exclusively. I'm not doing my own right now. I'm not saying I won't, but I took a hiatus from leading them. But they were in Europe. They were mostly we went to, France and Italy, Germany, places that have a combination of things that are the variety pack that I wanted. And the thing of it always was that we would stay somewhere beautiful. We would go at a pace that, like we'd vary it. So some days were more intensive, other days were more restful. There was time. We would always eat really nutritious, healthful food because your brain and your gut, which is your second brain, need to be all on board. You can't do these kinds of things where, okay, we're on the bus at 6 a.m. and then we're going to go, and you go so many places and you're all exhausted and stuff. And I know for a fact that if there was anybody doing it on any searchable level, there weren't many, because I did months of research to figure out, it just seemed kind of out there. But I did a lot of research to figure out if anybody was doing something like this, and they weren't. But what I learned was there's a lot of enforced marches in taking the name of workshop. And I was like, I know people. I know they're going to get tired of that. And they're going to want what I'm going to create next. And I will be waiting on the shore of that tsunami when it hits. And so I did. And so now a lot of people are doing it, I notice. But yeah, it became an experience, an experiential thing. The goal of that being when you're immersed, like I talked about, when you're well taken care of and your creative spirit is loved and being nurtured, and then you learn how to connect with that wherever, whenever, it's unconditional. You learn how to get in there and connect and get those pumps pumping no matter what. Then we would go out and apply that in the most breathtaking places, focusing on a certain type of photography. But if, because I know this for myself, if I'm not doing that, my photos are crap. That's how I learned how important it is, because I'd go out and go, all right, I'm just going to go out and get these photos. And I wouldn't really be mindful enough. And I'd come back and I'd delete everything because it was terrible. And so then I would go, all right, get your priorities straight here. Let's figure out what comes first. and only press the trigger, pull the trigger when I feel a sense of awe, when I'm having the physical manifestation of that, whether it's goosebumps or tears or a gasp or something that moves not just the spirit in you, but moves your whole body. That's the photo. I talked about that. I did a Smug Mug film talking about that very thing, about how I go about it. It's called Framing the Journey. And I talk about that because I felt really insecure talking about it. It was really funny. I had a meltdown the third day of filming because I'm like, oh, this is not what people want to hear. Anyway, thank God my filmmaker talked me off the ledge and we ended up doing a nice job. But there's so much beauty and awe in the world. God created it. It was created by the Creator. If you go out and look for those brush strokes of creation and focus on those, like as you pointed out, it's what you focus on and what you immerse in. If you go out for those kinds of experiences, whether it's on a photo retreat or whether it's just on your own, all the forces are going to come to you and go, here I am. And they're just going to bathe you in this awesomeness. But you have to number one, know there's a there, be willing to do it. Sometimes it's uncomfortable for different reasons, but it's not always just, oh, it's blissful. No, it's not always. Sometimes it's a slog, to get there. Yeah. Sometimes, especially when you're first learning, you don't always know that, oh, did I do it? Did I nail it? And then you go back and you look at it and you go, wow, I did. Oh, that's amazing. Or you go back and you look at your images and you go, well, I know what I was going for. And I think if I had just zoomed out a little or aimed a little less or I didn't notice the left side of my frame, right? So I got to remember to look all around the frame to really have it. And so you use all the different, the technique and the composition and the feeling and the light. I mean, it's all of it. And it's so immersive, and it's such a beautiful experience that's what I like to teach. And that's what the photo retreats were about. And that's even when I have a specific, going back to our earlier point, sometimes I have specific parameters with Kelby One. I pitch different ideas and they go, we like this idea. Now there's my parameters, but I'm going to bring this way of approaching parameters that maybe people think they know, and maybe shift the perception or shift possibilities within this parameter for people who are trying to learn maybe how to work the way I do.
You actually mentioned one really important aspect, and that's that ability to self-critique, because that's, for me, that's a really important part of learning.
Yeah.
You can imagine, we can learn by looking at other people's work. We can, try and emulate. We do that in music all the time, when we learn other people's music, for example, other people's songs on the guitar, I don't know, Jimi Hendrix guitar solos, Eddie Van Halen guitar, whatever it may be. And of course, over time, the mixture of all these things will then you'll be able to develop your own style. But the other part of that is basically, it's like cooking. You just throw lots of ingredients in, you stir it, and then whatever. Well, in my case, nothing good can ever come out of that. But so as long as you know which ingredients to throw in the pot, then that's probably a good thing. I clearly don't.
But you know what? I bet you've never played the game of, but what if I had to?
Oh no, I haven't.
No, because you have the option to not do it, which is fine. I mean, nobody's judging you for that. I'm just saying, I do the same thing. I say I don't like to cook and I don't want to cook, but if I have to, man, I'm pretty good. I just don't want anybody to know that, because I don't want anybody to expect that from me. But it's a fun game with something that you're just sure you really suck at, to go, but what if I had to?
Yeah.
And make that your limitation and see what
Absolutely.
happens.
That sounds like great fun. I might have to cook tonight. So, let's see how that
can be
simple.
Out. Yeah, it can be simple. It can just be, a one thing. It doesn't have to be like some galloping gourmet kind of thing. I was an athlete for many, many years, as you know, and basically when you're an athlete, one of the things you do, I mean, this is how you build your skills, is with drills, drills and exercises. You're like, I want to be a downhill skier. What is that? And then you look at somebody, skiing down the mountain a certain way, and then you have to go, all right, what are the skills involved? How do I break them down into drills and exercises so that I can not only build the skills, but build the right kind of strength and the right kind of reflexes and flexibility, or whatever that takes. And then you get to work, and really you spend most of your time doing those drills. And then you get to enjoy, then you go to the mountain and you try coming down and you see how, just like what you said, wow, I didn't make that turn, or, when the texture is like that, I go flying, or whatever. Which is why I could keep talking about, because I told you before, with my teaching, the teaching side of things, I brought so many of these things under the Kelby One umbrella. So I actually made a class about, because you're talking about going out and photographing northern lights on the Falklands, and it's a big adventure. And a lot of people feel intimidated by that sort of thing. But the same thing you're saying is part of what I was teaching in this class about drills and exercises, which is, you got to do them. You got to get in the mindset of how to break down your skills and then figure out where you're weak. So start in your backyard. Like you were out there. This was starting at the other end of the spectrum about making a discipline and making showing up to do particular drills. And, a lot of people say, take your camera everywhere, take pictures every day. And I'm like, great. What are you going to take pictures of? What's the goal of that? You're going to take a bunch of, Instagram snapshots. I'm like, I don't want to do that. So I gave a lot of just dumped out a lot of examples of exercises you can do in your backyard. And I filmed it in my backyard, and, before everything had started blooming out, and it just barely started. So it wasn't that pretty yet. But I found the beauty in it, and I found ways of explaining it as, you're not trying to create a masterpiece. What you're trying to do is build a skill. You're sketching. you're sketching with these images, and you're trying out ideas, and you're like, maybe you're not that good at it fast, because you got to be fast and good to go and do what you did, like balancing in the boat. Okay, so now I got to learn how to focus, and maybe you go out and you try to take good pictures while you're doing this,
Yeah.
or try to learn, well, what setting do I need? Like, how do people do that and build a repertoire of drills and exercises that trains yourself in the micro aspects of the bigger skill? And that's huge. And that's approaching it, photography, like, yes, you have to, be all light and love and whatever, blah, 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 but if you got to practice that too, but you also got to practice these photographic skills that go into the experiences that you want to have, so that when you spend a boatload of money getting there, or, going to these places, you've got it all. You've got it in your back pocket. Oh, I don't have to worry about that because I know what to do. I know from my retreat, a lot of people would get so overwhelmed with, you go to, Venice or, some of these gorgeous places with so many possibilities, and everywhere you look, it's just like massive sensory overload. How do you create focus? And so, we break that down into exercises, whatever it is, wherever you're weak, wherever it all breaks down. Then you go, oh, I lack this skill, I lack that skill. All right, let's build a set of exercises out of that. Then you're photographing every day with purpose, with a reason, with a particular reason. So people who say, oh, I don't have time. Well, you got 5 minutes to look at Facebook, pick up your camera for 5 minutes, shoot 3 photos that, take one, you're sitting at your desk, take one object, shoot it 3 different ways and call it a day. You've done your exercise. So, there's no excuses then.
How much planning goes into a shoot like that when you're, let's say, from obviously location is, that's part of a plan. Like you choose to go to a particular location, but how much planning actually goes into creating these sort of images?
Well, it really depends on what the purpose is. Some of the images I have learned, because you never really know about your own work, but other people have their reaction to it. Some of the ones that I know are the most impactful were simply, I just want to be at Lake Tahoe at sunset and just have an outing. I just want to be outside, right? There's no particular, I just know what I love to see, what I need to see to feel good, and what I want to see, what I desire to fill my vision with. And that's all I go with. So how much planning? Well, in that case, this is why I say it depends. Because if I'm going somewhere that I know, not a lot, just kind of, if I just want to have an outing, I'll go any old time of the day. If I want to shoot a sunset, I'll watch the clouds, because I can predict sunsets. And I know, where it's going to pop and when, and then I go. I have to watch the sky, and I know what to take, and not a lot of extra planning in that scenario when I just want to have an outing. If I'm traveling though, and I want to get a certain kind of photo, I really have to do a lot of planning. Not only for, depending on how I'm traveling. I have a class on this too, by the way. But anyway, depending on how I'm traveling, if I'm flying, if I'm taking a train, if I'm driving, if I'm pulling my rig, my trailer, those are all different opportunities, or, they have different requirements and possibilities. And then I don't want to waste my time. So, I'll get online and I'll look at other people's websites. I'll look at Google Images. I like to look up, see if in an area that I'm going, if anybody leads workshops or tours there. And in a couple instances, when I really need to get specific, I found photographers that do that. And then I would pay them a good, solid consulting fee to spend an hour on the phone with me, to tell me some of the locations, because my time and budget and everything that goes, all those constrictions, don't allow me the luxury of spending a month, or living there long enough to do what I can do in Tahoe. So Tahoe, I lived here for, 35 years in this area. I can't live in, like I did that for Zion. I had a job for Fujifilm to do. I had X amount of time, We could only do this. I needed to know it better than I could learn it in that amount of time. So I found someone who led tours. He was awesome, paid him a good chunk. I was real happy to do that. And he gave me a lot of ideas. And then when I got there, I had enough time to investigate those and the times of day that he recommended. And then I made my decisions about what I wanted to do with that from there based on the conditions available and the time. So that's a long-winded answer to say the planning really depends. Sometimes it doesn't take much. Sometimes it takes a lot. But that's why you really need to know what you're shooting and why. What is it you want to walk away with? And then work it backwards from there.
That's actually a really beautiful piece of advice. Is like, think of the outcome and then either sort of, what's the word? Reverse engineer the...
That's the best way to do it. And that's why, I recommend people do exercises and drills so that they have the skill, so that they don't, go, oh, I want this outcome. And they get out and they reverse engineer it and they go to all this trouble to be wherever it is. And then they don't have the skills to pull it off. That's always disappointing. Been there, done that. So I know personally what.
I love the whole idea of reverse engineering things. And I do all the time. I do all the time when I see... Yeah, as a portrait photographer, when I see portraits, that I really like, I'm immediately thinking, okay, well, where's the light? How is it lit? What's the, what's the light? How many lights? Blah blah. All that kind of stuff. What kind of diffusion or not? It's sort of second nature to me. Now, I did look at your Whimsical Revery series, and I have to say, no matter how much I looked at that, I just could not reverse engineer that at all. Tell me a little bit about that, because again, this is like, to me, and I think you call it artified photography.
That's my little code word for myself. I call it artified, because I artify my photos. Yeah,
it's so beautiful. It's like a blend of, I don't know, photography meets painting. It's absolutely stunning. Especially the hawk. I mean, that image is just, it blows my mind.
Yeah,
It's super
that was
beautiful.
in my backyard. I was like literally sitting I was sitting on my patio having a coffee in the morning. The hawk shows up. I mean, that's where I got all my hawk pictures, because we have a hawk. And I got my big old fat lens on and took a bunch of pictures. And I always call them pitchers, like it's a pitcher of water, because I don't know why it cracks me. I have to call them pitchers. Anyway, so that was one. And I couldn't ever get happy with the whole photo as a photo. I tried processing it different ways. And then one day I took it into Procreate and I went, oh, what if I pull it all the way? Because I looked at it, because I was like, why can't I get happy with this? I love the bird. I've got other ones that I like. I love the expression. There's so much I loved, but I had to stop and go, what? I'm missing the mark somewhere. Where is that? What is at the heart? Why did you take that picture? And I was like, it was the look right here in her face. And so I went, okay. Because, this was like over a couple of years. I still wasn't happy with it. So I took it into Procreate and I went, all right, and I looked at it again and I went, what's the one part that you really love that makes this image why you took it? And it was the face. So I zoomed that thing in and I zoomed it into where, like, I went by feel. I was like, not here, not here, not here. Oh, there. It was like that whole body feeling. Then I knew it was that. And then I was like, all right, now, if you were to artify this, really artify, what if you went further than you originally intended? What if is one of my favorite questions, because that just sort of opens the hatch in your mind. To see, your brain is it's designed to answer questions. It's hardwired for that. So if you say, what if I fill in the blank, your mind will make a huge effort to answer that question. So I said, well, what if I artify? And then my brain starts going, well, you could do this. Well, you could, where there was no answer before, suddenly I had 1,000 answers. And I just kind of kept going at it. And then I liked it. And then all of a sudden I heard, what if you change the color? What if you take her really out of this world? And then the blue happened. And I was like, okay, that's it. There was the image.
Was that the image that sort of sparked off that whole series or that whole style?
No, that started during the pandemic. I had started doing this sort of thing before the pandemic, but I was very busy. I was traveling a lot, teaching a lot, photographing a lot, just creating classes. I mean, it was like the end of 2019. I was so exhausted I could hardly see straight. But I had already been messing around for the past a couple of years before that with artifying, using different tools and trying to figure out what I liked and what tools I liked using, and kind of what are you doing here? What's going on here? What are you trying to create? And I just messed around. I didn't give myself any. I didn't say I couldn't do it. I just messed around. Didn't love the results, but there they were. So the pandemic happened, and I had already kind of decided I wanted to dive more into that. Once that November, once all my obligations were done, I was going to take the winter and really dive into this, because by now I had some ideas. And then the pandemic happened, and I thought to myself, after some really foul language, I thought to myself, okay, well, you got the time now. Might as well do it. And so I was like, well, what stories do you want to tell? And so they were very simple. So first of all, I don't know if you follow if you know of Maggie Taylor's work. She's been around forever, and her husband, Jerry Ullsman. They were, sorry, I'm messing around with my necklace here because it's bugging me. They were early Photoshop people, and they did this early kind of weird composite storytelling, otherworldly things. And it had a particular style because they did it in the 90s. But I always loved it. And so a lot of these artists would like buy a box of slides off eBay and then, photograph them, or photograph they just put together like weird stuff. And look at Monty Python and the style of art that they did with the Monty Python, trailers and stuff like that. And there's just always something about that. And Aesop's fables and stories that I grew up with that were this amalgam of all these like weird, plus the visions that I had and what I saw when I was out in nature. So I was like, all right, how do we do this, and what is going to bring it together? So I started telling the stories of what I felt. I thought to myself, what does a feeling look like? I had some very definite opinions and feelings about the pandemic. And I was like, all right, what does that feeling look like? And it had many layers. It was like painful and poignant and dark, but it was beautiful. It had texture and light. What does that look like? So I just messed around. Some of them are still among my favorites, but it's evolved over time to where the story now, I'm telling bigger stories, more specific stories using my photographs, but changing them. They have to, see, for me, there's a line. On this side is photography, and on this side is Whimsical Reveries. So if I'm going to take a photograph and do the Whimsical Reverie thing, it's got to cross the barrier into that world. So I have to do a thing, whatever it is, with the photograph to have it be the baseline. And there's a variety of things. Some of it's Procreate, some of it's, apps that are actually out of, that probably my next update on this machine, I won't even be able to use them anymore, but also new techniques and brushes and all kinds of crazy things. I've got to transform it. And then I can start bringing in other elements and making it all part of that world. And the story's got to come to mind, because they all have a purpose and a story. There's some of them. My husband sometimes says, I sometimes wonder if the stories are too subtle. And I'm like, well, maybe, but I think what it is, I think the calling is, because it's not coming. When I create one of these and I come out of creating it, I'm like, whoa, where was I? I'm in an altered state when I make them, and I am really connected to source, and there's a definite point to them all. But I think I don't just put them out there. I think I've got to tell not only the big story in which they all fit, but each one's little beautiful poignant story. So that's to come, but that's sort of where the work is now. But that's how it also started, was telling little stories about feelings and how I would do it differently. Plus, I wanted to learn techniques in Procreate and learn how to kind of master that tool, combine it with Photoshop, combine it with photos, combine it with unlikely elements. And so some of them were very simplistic in the beginning, but told a really poignant story, and I still like them for that. Some of them just sucked. But, they have evolved, and they will probably continue to evolve because they tell a different story.
Yeah, so Procreate is an app for the iPad. Do you use an Apple Pencil with that? Is that...
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I do that on the iPad Pro. And the funny thing is, the screen is so small. You're like, I can't work on a screen that small. But when I start working on these, it's like I go into this little porthole and then the world opens up. That's what the experience of creating in there is. I don't know if that's everybody's. That's mine. But I come back out and I look at it later and I'm like, how did I do that on such a small screen? Because it didn't seem small when I was doing it.
I have to say, I really like Procreate. I haven't spent that much time with it myself, but my youngest daughter is a big Procreate fan. So she, what was it? Must have been like maybe 2 years ago or something. She went from drawing on paper to drawing digitally using Procreate. And I have to say, it's really, it's incredible, the kind of work that she's been able to create in there. It's really stunning. So it's
a lot of artists, I've run into various wildlife artists and stuff on my hikes and explorations, different places, and they tend to really look down on digital art. That's a cute way to start. Is kind of their attitude. If you're a real artist, you'll switch. And so I kind of, voiceover was the ugly stepchild to the acting world. Photography is like the ugly stepchild to the art world, and digital art is like the ugly stepchild to the art world. And I guess we're just all ugly children, whatever. And so, but the thing is, so I don't know, that's my burden. But I started doing this and that really restricted me, that thinking. And then I just decided, okay, but why go? I mean, I want to learn. There's some other kinds of painting I want to get into because I'm curious and interested in acrylic pour painting and some abstract watercolor stuff. I just have these certain visions of that. And when I have time, I'm going to do that. But I was like, look, you've already got photographs that you love. And the light values, the light is there. It's there. You don't have to make it. You've done it. You are an artist in photography. So now you're just taking that art and creating a new form of art, but you're taking what I just love it because it really makes it unique in my own. And it's digital, sure, but it is following again. It goes back to what gives you awe? How are you channeling light? What do you need to see, want to see? Must you create on a visceral level that fills you up so much? And then that's where I start with each piece. I'll take a photo I love, and now I'm starting to shoot. Now I'm starting to shoot for them. Before, and I still can do this, I take old photos and convert them. I'm like, how else can I see these? It's a different way to do it. And then so that's one process. The other is I'm starting to shoot for them now. And I was laughing on a hike a few weeks ago. I was doing that, and I'm like, I feel like I'm doing real estate shots, but it's real estate for these worlds that I'm going to create. And so now I'm apparently a real estate shot. Yeah,
I was going to ask you that as to whether it's something that you shoot for with the edit in mind, because I'm a big believer in thinking of the final product, and I'm saying product in inverted commas,
right?
The final work, and shooting for that. I mean, this is when I teach portrait photography. This is part of what I teach is that I shoot for the edit. This is this thing in camera clubs very often. When I do demos, for example, there's a considerable part of the audience that will be of the you have to get it right in camera opinion. And I always think okay, let's break this down because I also have to get it right in camera. I have to get it right for the edit because I already know what the post-processing process is going to be. And so therefore I need to get it right for that. So just like somebody who doesn't want to do any post-processing has to get it right in camera, I also have to get it right, because if I don't, it has a massive impact on what I can do in the edit. And so, making people understand that digital photography, I mean, I say digital photography, but of course you can bring it back to film and a dark room and all the rest of it, Like Ansel Adams didn't just go, well, yeah, this is like getting right in camera. That's not what he's known for. So that's the thing. So
he's known for the dark room is what you're saying. What he did with it afterwards, that's what he's known for.
Exactly.
Right?
But also, exactly, yeah. But also, of course, also old Ansel went out there and he knew exactly what he was going to do in the dark room. And so therefore he shot whatever it was that he shot with the post-processing, the darkroom work in mind, in order to create the work that he did, and I think that's the important thing, to not think to I was like monosyllabical, whatever the word is, but to actually remember that that's it, yeah. But to remember that it's a process, and each link in the chain is important in order to create that final result, and this is the
right.
It's so anyway, that long speech just aimed at my original question was, whether you shoot for the edits, or whether it was just a matter of could you answer it.
But it's a great question because I'm in the middle of the process now, so I'm not really sure. Like when I first started, I was learning some things in Procreate, and then I was like, oh, this is like the basis of a world, and what if I did this, and what if I did that? And I was inventing a process. So I didn't have an end result in those photographs in mind because I had them, and I was like, what else can I do? So then it evolved to, I started to learn what I liked, right? I started to learn, oh, I wish I had you got to decide to start some direction or learn some technique so that eventually you can go, this is cool, but this is what I like the most about it, right? So so then it evolved to, all right, what old photos do I have that could hold up this idea, this world or whatever? And then I sort of, built from there. And now I'm like, okay, I see where the story's going. All right. So now I know what to shoot when I'm out there, because now I know that because of past, and luckily, thank God, I have a ridiculous library of photos just like that. I don't know whether that means that I was photographing for this all that time, or I just think it's the amalgam of what I love to see in a big landscape and this world when I put them together. Because this world that I'm creating has all these beautiful scenes in them. They have Lake Tahoe. It just doesn't look like this Lake Tahoe. It's like their Lake Tahoe.
People often put things into drawers. Like this thing, photography, goes into that drawer, and this thing called painting or art or whatever goes into that drawer, and we cannot under any circumstances mix the two. When really the most, if you look at art history, for example, first of all, some of the most beautiful pieces of art are really an amalgamation of a number of different styles, where people just went, well, I mean, back in the Stone Age, people just put their hands on the side of the, on a rock and then just blue painted it and go like, oh, look at that. That's the shape of a hand. And then somebody went, if I can use that to make a shape of a hand, I wonder what else I can do with this weird like paint stuff that was just invented. And then before you know it, I paint like little pictures of, I don't know, gazelles and deer and people. And then somebody went, I wonder if I could take that and then, maybe I'd draw something more. Maybe if I add some, I don't know, background. And so you can kind of see how over time, and then somebody went like, well, what if I use watercolors? I just made that. And I use papyrus. And it was like, whatever. And now we are where we are, right, because there's always been somebody who's been pushing the envelope, just that little bit further, and then all of a sudden somebody invented oil colors, oil paint, and I'm like, okay, well, that's pretty cool. So now we can paint on canvas or stuff, and
and see, I think you're moving toward a great point that we can wrap up on, which is, I mean, I'm saying wrap up. This is your show, but it just is like, oh my God, this is like the perfect conclusion of it all, of all of it, because it's like what you're describing, which is an accurate process, is like, you think, our brains like to think, okay, there it is, now we're done. but you have to keep cracking it open to let the light get in, to then go, oh, there's something else. What if I go there? What if I go there? And to me, that's the whole point behind, and again, it goes back to that early childhood vision, because the whole point of everything I do, whether it's teaching, creating art, photographing, being brand ambassador, whatever, is creating the crack. How do we let more light in? How do we let more light in? Because here's something interesting, little food for thought. A lot of my training, I think it evolved out of the voice training, but a lot of my training was, and personal development work enabled me to recognize programming and to know what programming was and to know why someone would want to program a person, how they would do it. It was never good. It was always nefarious, as it turned out. But, and it came from a portion of my training that involved studying different maladies, like borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, some of these disorders. So I have this tremendous, psychological, neurological background, right? So there was a time, I'm not going to go deep into this, but I have come to recognize how programming has been exerted upon a global population at this point. Not going to go into depth, but there it is. So I knew it was going on all my life because I could sense it, right? Because I have these extra senses that I know what's going on. But there's no ears to talk about it because everybody was programmed. Nobody could hear it. So you were the crazy one. And so, cut to now I started recognizing it in the media, and I'm like, they're programming. Now if it's this far, whatever their plan was has come this far, and now we're seeing it. And this was, some years ago. And my takeaway from it all was I always knew my purpose, because programming is dark and light is light. And I always just stuck with my purpose and what I'm here to do. And for a while there, artists are still free. Of course, now we have AI, so now we got that going on. But, talk about programming. So I recognize that we have this huge programming issue. And, okay, so another one in my acting world, I, went deep into the Nazis got really into mind control and a lot of other weird stuff that they did. And we won't go into that, but I'm just going to pull the mind control thread. So we saw that. So the thing that I know about those things is, number one, you have to know what's going on. Number two, you have to realize you probably are too, to some degree, because it's all over the world. It's not just in one place. And number three, what the people who get out, what do they do? So one of the things is because one of the hallmarks of that kind of mind control programming, whatever you want to call, is it doesn't occur to people. It doesn't occur to people to think. It doesn't occur to them to think. They can't think to think. So therefore, that's where the hard candy shell in your brain comes from. So as artists, thank God, praise God that we're artists, because number one, we have been able to access the creative force. You called me a creative force. I access the creative force. And it comes in the form of, it's God, but it comes in the form of awe and light and all these other things. And yes, our little world has been invaded by AI, but we still have a place to put our stand, to make our stand and to do this thing. But it does involve creating the cracks in the hard candy shell so the light can get in, and to honor that and to keep finding ways to bringing it, because awe. So here's one of our hooks, is our good hooks, that one of our, I don't know what the word is, but awe. One of the hallmarks of awe is that it happens unbidden. It happens in an instant, and it changes everything. That is now scientifically founded. You can go deeper into it through Dr. Keltner's work, but I love that he actually can, quantify it. It's not just me going all woo, even though I knew it my whole life, but everybody thought I was crazy my whole life, which let's talk about that. Okay. Anyway, so as artists, whether it's through music, photography, art, thinking different, giving ourselves permission and making people start to go, wow, what if those little things are what start to, create the cracks in universe that create the cracks in the hard candy shell. It's keeping you in the same, because that's what's intended. I really rankle it. Oh, that's what you want me to do? I'm not going to do that then. I'm going to do something else. Because if you want me to do that, you got some agenda. I don't like you. Whoever you are, you know.
And on that note, it's the what if, or in my case, it's the, wouldn't it be cool if, type of question that is ultimately the central question that right. I ask myself all the time. And, again, something I've mentioned many times on this podcast. Would it be cool if I could create something that just pushes that envelope just a little bit further?
Yeah.
Yeah. And, that is the thing, I think. That is the thing, the kind of thinking that will ensure that we as humans can move art forward into the future. And we're not going to have to
move ourselves into a lighter state, because there is a change going on. The frequencies are going up. I mean, I think it's safe enough to say that now. I've known that for a long time. I had visions about this time when I was a kid, that when the frequencies came up and there was more light and what would happen and when dark was exposed. And I mean, it was this whole crazy, it would have been a great movie, right? But it was my childhood, another childhood vision. And so I knew this time was coming. I knew this time was why I came here, and probably why you came here, and why those of us who are, the needle movers and the bringers of light and heart and soul and awakening are doing what we're doing. It's really important.
It is absolutely super important. Karen, thank you so much for coming on the Kevershake podcast, being our guest this week. It's been an absolutely delightful. It's been a delightful conversation. Thank you for your art. I said it at the very beginning. It absolutely blew my mind. It still blows my mind, and I highly encourage anybody listening to this episode or watching it on YouTube. Make sure you check out Karen's website. All the details, all the links to all of your various websites are going to be in the description, of course. So make sure you check that out. Karen, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kirsten. This has been enlightening and wonderful, and I'd give you a big hug right now if I could. But live long and prosper.
Okay, folks, that is it for today. It was fantastic having Karen on the show. And as always, before we go, let me just recommend another episode that I think you like. Check out last week's episode with Ellie Rothney. I'm sure you love it. If you enjoy our content, consider supporting us on buymeacoffee.com/Kevershake to help us continue creating and bringing you more exciting episodes. It really does mean the world to us. And for those of you who are listening to the audio version of this podcast, did you know that there's a fully fledged video version over on YouTube with plenty of examples of our guest photography in full Technicolor? Well, you should by now, because I keep mentioning it all the time. So, if you're listening, go over to YouTube. All you have to do is go over to YouTube, search for Kevershake Podcast, and you'll be able to watch all past episodes on there. And if you're already on YouTube, well, make sure to drop us a comment, hit the like button, ring that bell, and share with your friends. Your engagement helps us reach a wider audience all over the world. Thank you for listening and watching, and remember, a new episode drops every Thursday, so make sure you mark that in your calendars. Until next time, keep shaking things up in the world of photography. See you next Thursday.